I'm your host, and today I'm lucky enough to have Danny Lum as our guest. We'll be discussing everything you need to know when it comes to isometric training, some strength secrets to specifically improve your running performance, whether you're a distance runner or if you're playing field sports and running something you're looking to improve upon this season. Thanks for jumping on, Danny. Looking forward to diving into isometrics. Obviously, it's an area that you've done a lot of research in.
Thanks for inviting. Yeah, all good, man. All good.
No doubt the strength and conditioning coaches, sports scientists will be well aware of your background, Danny. But for the rest that might not be aware of your journey, do you mind providing a bit of an intro into how you started in the industry? I guess where it all started for you from a passion point of view, and then the different experiences and different research that you've done over the years.
Okay. I started off my sports science journey in Australia. Actually, I graduated from University of Western Australia for my undergrad in health and exercise science, and after that, I continued working as personal trainer for a while in Australia before I landed a job in Singapore Armed Forces as a strength conditioning officer. Stayed there for 2 years. During during that period, I actually applied for a job in Singapore Sport Institute, but I was rejected 3 times, and I finally got the job on the fourth application, and then I stayed on until now for 11 years now. And during those this period of time, I went on to do my master's and my PhD in the local university. Master's project was on comparing plyometric and sprint training for endurance runners, and my PhD project was basically on isometric strength training for different sports. Yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much my journey until now. I recently stepped down as the team lead for the strength conditioning team because holding on a leadership role can be pretty tiring. So I requested to step down so that I can focus a little more on the practice and research side of things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, and what about strong influences, mentors, if you like, that have helped shape your sort of
Ah,
philosophy?
well, I don't really have any particular mentors, but uh, my collaborators like Greg Half, Paul Comfort, Tim Sukumel, Lachlan James, these are people who have value added me a lot because of their expertise, and I learned a lot from just collaborating with them. One person uh, that really helped me a lot is I would say Alex Natera. Um, his love for isometric training is something that sort of influences me, and his continuous support for the things I do is actually a motivation for me to continue doing it. Yeah, so I would say uh, Alex is probably a big influence to my work, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And throughout your career, what have been the most significant challenges? Obviously, master's project's no easy feat, but PhD is next level.
hmm
Something obviously you'd be really proud of the work that you've done. But what would be the biggest challenges that you faced, and what did you sort of learn, or how did you grow as a coach or practitioner?
Um, I think one of the biggest challenge I have actually until now, I would say, which is people's perception of what a strength conditioning coach is like, what our job scope. People always have the perception that we are like bicep curls and squats, you know. And that's also one of the reasons why I went on to do my PhD is to um, give people the impression that we're not simply bicep curls and squat. That there is a lot of there is a lot of science and knowledge involved with what we do, uh, and it is to actually become a good strength conditioning coach. We actually need to have in-depth knowledge of not just exercise prescription, but we have to be very well versed in things like biomechanics, physiology, nutrition, a little bit of psychology. You know, um, it's a lot of in-depth knowledge, and again, it's not as simple as just getting people to do bicep curl. We actually have a lot of reason why um, a particular exercise is prescribed over the other exercise, and training the athlete is not simply a workout. It's a lot of effort in planning, rationalizing why we do 2 reps over why we do 5 reps and things like that. Yeah. So these are challenges that the challenge is basically trying to shape the perspective of people on what a strength conditioning coach is all about. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, there's plenty of plenty that goes into the plan that you're taking an athlete through, and like you said, it's very different to just coming up with a workout.
Yeah.
It's about where you're going next, and where have we been, and that individual in mind as well. Moving into the topic isometrics, I guess to introduce the term, what would be a definition, I guess, of an isometric, and why is it something that you're so passionate about and you've dedicated so much work and research to?
Mm, in for simple understanding, isometric is just simply us producing force without external movement. So things like wall sit or prone plank, that's isometric. Um, that's whole isometric, meaning we are resisting a certain amount of force without movement. And then there's push isometric, whereby we are exerting force against something we can't move. Yeah, that's push isometric. There's some distinct neuromuscular control between push and hold. For more information, you can find actually contact me, and then I can point you to the review paper that a group of us actually wrote recently. Um, and I started off with isometric training while working with our judo athletes. Um, one one thing that one reason why I included isometric training was because if you look at judo fights, judo bout, they actually involve a lot of isometric contraction, struggling, holding, trying to hold down the opponent and stuff like that. And that's one reason why I started to include isometric training. And the other reason was also because back then I had this athlete who was like 200 kilogram. He's huge, and but his movement literacy wasn't that great. Um, and I had a very short period of time to make him strong to perform for one of the major games. And so I didn't really have that much time to teach him a lot of all the dynamic movement, heavyweight squats, and things like that. So that was the reason why I incorporated a lot of isometric training for him. Yeah. And because of that, when I realized that isometric training actually works, um, so I started including it for a group of swimmers as well. And it helped them to get really strong. It also helped them, well, that also transferred to their performance in the water. Um, for that particular year, every one of them actually uh, set a new personal best for their respective event. And then that started getting me to be interested in isometric training. And then the opportunity came for me to do my PhD, and and I just proposed that I want to do isometric training for sports performance because that back then in 2017, 2018, there weren't a lot, there were really very little studies on isometric training for sports performance, and I saw the gap and I jumped on it. Yeah, and that's why we are here chatting today.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that provides great context, mate. I appreciate you providing a bit of a, I guess, reasoning and rationale on your experience with it. Diving into a little bit of the weeds, what were, like, I guess, if for a coach listening in that hasn't exposed perhaps the athletes they're working with to true isometric, like isometric push and holding
Mm.
isometrics, weighted isometrics, perhaps they've done like core plank work and maybe some wall squat holds and more basic, but for the more running specific postures, things like you mentioned, Alex, the ankle ISO, knee ISO,
Yeah.
and hip ISO, just to name a few. What would be some important things to consider when introducing it to a group of athletes that perhaps haven't got any background? Is it in it? What's the appropriate dosage, do you think, to start, and where do you sort of build that over, whether it be a pre-season if it's a field sport, or over the year or the off season for distance runners?
Okay. Just a little bit on the concept of training. So the concept of isometric adaptation to isometric training is pretty similar to dynamic training, right? So for example, if I want to increase my strength through a greater range of movement, then for dynamic training, I use squat, for example. I will do a full range squat, right? I'll do a deep squat because I want to increase my strength throughout a greater range of movement. So if I implement isometric training, it would be the same thing. If I want to get the person to improve strength through a greater range of movement, I would get them to squat to a lower depth, maybe get to a parallel squat position and perform the isometric uh, contraction at that particular position. Of course, if the best outcome would be to perform the isometric training, isometric exercise at different range. But if you only gonna perform uh at one position, then um the position whereby the muscle length is longer will be better. Um, Another thing is isometric, just like uh, dynamic training, if you want to induce hypertrophy, you want to have a higher volume. So in isometric context, it will be a longer duration of contraction. For example, if I want to induce hypertrophy, then I would get the person to perform isometric contraction for 20 seconds instead of just 5 seconds. Yeah. And again, if maximum strength is my uh, objective, then I want to make sure that I perform, I'm exerting as much force as possible during the contraction. If explosive strength is my objective, then I want to make sure that my contraction is as rapid as possible, right? Then for runners, okay, for runners, one of the things that I I came up with, I came up with the concept of plyometric training plus isometric training, because when you look at rapid stretch shortening cycle, the what happens during a rapid stretch shortening cycle is the muscle will remain in a relative isometric state while stretching the tendon so that you get the elastic energy stored and tendon recoil and you get that extra ballistic force, right? The higher ballistic and rapid force. But what a review paper have shown is that while plyometric training is good at improving the muscular strength, it's not as good in increasing the tendon stiffness. So because tendon responds better to slow high strain. So that is where including isometric training can help with runners. So to improve tendon stiffness, what we want to do is to have high, sorry, high intensity contraction, but during that contraction, we want to build up the force slowly. Yeah. And again, it will be better to perform that particular isometric exercise at the position where the muscle is stretched. So an example would be if my objective is to work on the patella tendon, then I want to perform the isometric leg extension at 90-degree angle instead of a 150-degree angle, right? Because 90-degree angle, we are stretching the quads more, and we are also stretching the tendon more. In that way, we can optimize the adaptation for the tendon. Yeah. And same as dynamic strength training, we want to periodize how to periodize the isometric training as well. In general, when we plan a training program, we will always go from general to specific, and we start off with working on morphological adaptation, and then when it gets to the specific specific phase, adaptation, we'll be working more on the neural adaptation because we work on specific range for the sport as well. So during general phase, we work more on long muscle length, we work more on slow contraction and long contraction because we want to build up the strength of the tendon. And then as we get to the specific phase, we can start working on explosive strength, rate of force development, and also we can get into a more sport-specific range. So instead of doing a single leg isometric split squat at 90-degree knee angle, we get into a more run specific position. We'll do that isometric split squat at about 120-degree knee angle because that's where that's pretty much similar joint position during the ground contact phase of the running. Yeah. And we'll do instead of slow 20-30 seconds contraction, we're gonna do a rapid 2-3 seconds contraction with multiple repetitions because we are going to work on the rate of force development as well. Yeah.
Well said. That's great detail. Appreciate you going into for particularly coaches listening in, I guess a bit of rationale on how to periodize your isometrics and I guess working back from the adaptation you're trying to achieve with the population you're working with. That's fantastic, Danny. I know it's obviously context specific, but during your general build-up phase, like what type of frequency do you think is minimum to make a change? And then how many exercises do you like to fit that in within the dynamic strength training in terms of isometrics?
Okay, so in general, what I usually recommend is to mix isometric training with dynamic strength training as well, right? So let's say you usually have 3 to 4 sets of squats, 3 to 4 sets of heavy squats. I will recommend replacing 1 or 2 sets of the heavy squats with uh, isometric squats. So yeah, just to have that combination because isometric isometric has its pros and cons, dynamic has its pros and cons, and if you put them together, you can sort of offset uh, the flaws of each uh, training method, and then allow the athletes to get a more optimized adaptation. Yeah. And for individuals who do not have that luxury of time to uh, have one or two separate sessions for strength training, what they can do is microdosing the isometric training. So usually what I would recommend this group of people to do is have that isometric, uh, have a few isometric exercises in the warm-up for their runs, right? So for example, instead of just simply doing a hamstring static stretch during your warm-up, you get into your static stretch position and perform that isometric hip extension.
Mm.
Yeah. And do that for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maximum voluntary contraction. You do that one set during the warm up. If you're gonna do if you're gonna run 3 to 5 times a week, that would be three to five uh 3 to 5 times um of that maximal voluntary contraction. Yeah, oh, that volume of work would add up.
And you mentioned hypertrophy. If hypertrophy is the goal during that general phase, do you prefer doing yielding, sort of holding isometrics, and then push more for your explosive, or is it not as simple as that?
Yeah. I would say both are fine. But based on our unpublished study, the whole isometric yielding isometric tend to be better for hypertrophy. But of course, if uh, you don't have that, if you don't have equipment, then you can still do push isometric because push isometric requires uh, less equipment. You can push against the wall. You can just you know like get into a hamstring stretch position and then do the uh, push iso hamstring contraction. Um, the another advantage of push isometric is you can always get into maximum voluntary contraction, which can is because you're at 100% maximum voluntary contraction, you can induce strength gain better as well. Yeah.
And you mentioned like tendon stiffness. Have you experienced or heard from other practitioners that there might be particular athletes out there where perhaps they have an adequate amount of tendon stiffness, or even perhaps they have too much tendon stiffness compared to the muscle, and therefore isometrics can be harming, at risk for injury? Is that something that people be aware of, or is that not something you've seen or heard of?
Yes, so far, no. Um, so far, no one has mentioned that to me before. I think one of the reason is because we can't really measure tendon stiffness unless we have specialized equipment. Um, in most cases, I would, at least for Singapore context, where our athlete start heavy resistance training at a later stage, they tend to have a lot more tendon injury than muscular injury. My hypothesis is that because they don't do a lot of slow, heavy lifting, but they do a lot of ballistic plyometric and sprints and stuff like that, where they work a lot more on the muscle, but not so much on the tendon. And while they're young, it's not an issue. But as they grow older, collagen turnover slows down, and there starts to have a greater muscular versus tendon strength imbalance. Yeah. So and that's one of the reasons why I always advocate to have young kids to start strength training early. We don't really have to wait till they're 13, 14, and so on before we start weights training for them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned the pairing it with plyometrics. I think you looked at that with your masters.
Mm.
Sprinting activities. What are the benefits? Is it simply more efficient for time, or is it? Do you feel like there's periods of your year, perhaps later, maybe in the finals campaign for field sports, or when Olympic athletes are peaking and you're looking for minimum fatigue, but maximize sort of their peak
Yeah.
peak velocity and peak strength? Is that a good time for contrast training? What's your thoughts?
Uh, Not necessary. They can actually include isometric throughout the training phase. Because we did a study that was 24 weeks long, and we showed that if we included isometric throughout that 24 weeks, the athletes actually improved their jump, sprints, and strength better than the group that did not include the isometric training. Um, all this can be periodized. Of course, um, one of the advantage of isometric training is that you get to recover faster. So while acutely you might still feel fatigue, but because of the lack of eccentric contraction, um, they don't take as long to recover from that fatigue. So one of our studies we did was we compared a full session of isometric training versus heavy dynamic training. Um, what we showed was within 24 hours, the isometric condition went back to baseline. Um, some of the participants actually uh, jump and sprint faster on 24 hours later. But with heavy resistance training, 24 hours was not enough for to recover back to baseline. Yeah. So in that case, you're right about if they're in the tapering phase, uh, closer to competition, they might want to replace a session of strength, replace a session of heavy lifting with isometric, so that they can still maintain the strength while not uh, while reducing the recovery time. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. And what about with on that note, it's a good segue for like priming sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Would you vary your isometric prescription depending on the event? So like a 100-meter sprinter compared to maybe Olympic weightlifter compared to a marathon runner? Would you use different explosive isometrics to holding isometric long endurance or max strength, or would you use the same sort of method?
Yeah, if the purpose is priming, then I'll go with low volume of rapid isometric. So say things like 2 to 3 sets of uh 5 repetition, one second, 1 second contraction. Just push 1 second and relax. Push 1 second and relax. And then pair it with low volume of plyometric work as well. So it really depends on the habit of the athlete If they have been doing priming sessions, then that will work. But if they not used to priming, having a priming session on the day before the competition, then they will have to do some trial and error during the training, just to make sure how it feels. You've seen a lot of studies showing the post-activation performance enhancement effect, and um, there's always this individual response to the volume of work required to induce that PAP effect. So individual athletes will really have to try it out, what suits them best. But in general, I would say for priming purpose, they should work on low volume and uh, be explosive.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's great advice. But for the athletes listening in that might want to try that on the next, like you said, next training session, if they found it effective, help with their speed or perhaps their performance, to give it a go day before a game. Where would you recommend the optimal time to do that? Would that be an hour before game day or an event like 100-meter sprint, or would you think the day before, 24 hours before, 12? Is there a duration that you think's best, or is it
Mm-hmm.
more individually based?
Yeah, definitely individually based, but based on research, it's between 6 to 24 hours. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, if they have, I think most athletes will have a short training session the day before, so they can try doing a 24-hour priming session. Yeah.
Yep. And for athletes or coaches as well, what are some of the common mistakes that you've heard of or seen when it comes to integrating isometric training with dynamic strength training?
Mm, I wouldn't say mistake, but rather a different uh, perspective of how they implemented isometric training. Um, so, for example, I recently posted, not recently, actually, a few months back, I posted on the isometric bend knee calf hold. And so I was looking at the position of performing that bend knee calf hold. If the vector of force, so I'm hold on a Smith machine, then the vector of force is this way, right? Like it's coming down directly, and then my shin angle is actually slanted. Then um, it it becomes not exactly how the vector of force would be during uh, uh, sprint acceleration, because during the sprint acceleration, vector of force would be uh, in line with the shin angle, right? But if I'm holding uh, a barbell, the vector of force would be this way when my shin angle is this way. Then the stress on the joint will be different. So when we implement isometric training, or not just isometric training, but all sorts of training, and we want to be movement specific, joint position specific, we also have to bear in mind the vector of the force, the direction of the force. Yeah. So because if we don't take that uh, into consideration, then we might be training a wrong thing altogether. Yeah.
Mm. And how did you counteract that challenge? Is it moving towards the wall, or what did you do differently from the Smith machine?
So instead of raising my heel that high, that I just did my heel a little bit lower, closer to to the ground, because
Yep.
then I will stress my calf a little more, because if I raise my heel this high, whereby how
Almost full plantar flexion.
yeah, when you're doing what's it called, sprint acceleration, your heel will be high because your shin angle will be this way, right? Your shin angle this way, and your ankle will be in about 90-degree position. So then your heel will be off the ground, high off the ground. But that works that if you're pushing against what prowler that you can't move,
Mm.
yes, you can do isometric that way because your vector of force is correct. But if
Yeah.
you're using a Smith machine, then your vector of force is downwards. You want to make sure that the vector of force is in line with your shin angle.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's the
Yeah.
if you're working on acceleration joint angles, the prowler or a wall would be better.
Yeah,
But for
probably.
sprinting, the Smith machine or barbell can work.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's a good one. Before we start to wrap up, I know that it's been 45 minutes of your time, mate, but is there anything that we haven't discussed or dived into when it comes to isometric training, specifically for running performance, that you wanted to touch on?
Mm, not really. I think what I've done is more providing the concept of training. If viewers, listeners are interested in being really specific into the running isometric, I think I'll recommend Alex Natera's run specific isometric training. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, make sure to check that out. We can add the links in the show notes. And
Mm.
just three personal questions, Danny. In your work life, what are your pet peeves? Anything that sort of fires you up, makes you angry from a industry perspective?
uh, um, people doing funny things, and and then saying that it's effective training, but there's no real scientific backing to it. That's a little bit annoying. Things like standing on Bosu ball doing bicep curls. Yeah,
There's plenty of that
yeah.
going around the social media world.
Yeah, so that's sometimes these are really annoying, because like I mean that's just an example, but there are many things that happens online with people doing very fanciful things, and then you have your athletes starting to come over to you and say, can we start doing this and that, because it looks difficult, um you know but I think we need to educate the athletes to know that things are difficult doesn't mean they are relevant or effective or beneficial to your sports performance. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about what's your favorite thing to do on a day off?
I'm a huge Japanese animation fan, so and so reading comics, watching animation, that's my best way of relaxing myself.
What's your favorite animation?
Oh, there's too many of them. I'm at the moment I'm watching the big names like One Piece, Solo Leveling, you know. Yeah, I'm still waiting for Dragon Ball Super to come back.
Oh, yeah, right. Fantastic. That reminds me of Cheese TV growing up
Yeah.
before school. And then obviously with the recording of this podcast in early 2025, March 2025, what's on the
Okay.
horizon for the rest of the year? What are you most excited about?
So right now I'm put in charge of a research task force for Singapore Sport Institute. So and my main uh my main role is actually to promote our research, to make research findings applicable to coaches. So we'll be setting up Instagram page to promote our research work. So I hope that we can get the message across, and get our athletes, coaches, to actually find all this research work that we have done useful. And we also want to uh, conduct workshops to allow to better transfer this knowledge to our local coaches. And hopefully with all this upskilling, and they can actually help us to grow the ecosystem, better train our athletes. Yeah, that's what I hope we can achieve. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. It's all something I will we'll make sure to add the link to the Instagram page when it's ready in the show notes. So if you listen to the podcast recording, you'll be able to access it there and give it a follow and engage.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of questions sent through from game crushers on YouTube, Danny. What would be an appropriate age range to start was their first question, and they've just sort of commented, or is it more on maturity and ability? Is it age
Okay.
thing or more competency based?
I started my son doing kettlebell deadlifting when he was around 4 or 5. Um, so I always say, if you can get your kids to hold your shopping bag and climb the stairs with heavy school bags, you can start them on weight training. But of course, that's within their own capability. And also just we want to make sure that they are lifting with the right posture. Um, yeah, I don't think there's really a limit to when they can start. Like, 3-year-olds, they're already starting to try to lift heavy things whatever they see. It would be so much better if we actually go ahead and teach them how to lift things properly, rather than uh, getting them to make mistake and get themselves injured. So yeah, I personally don't think that there is a right age to start. They can start anytime as long as they are working within their own capability. Yeah.
And that's the same for isometrics.
Yeah. For isometric, I wouldn't get them to start the push isometric too early. Usually I would recommend whole isometric for younger age, simply because they probably haven't learned to execute the technique properly. They have not learned to brace properly. So start them off with just body weight whole isometric. Uh, and when they have good control of their posture, we can slowly move on to push isometric.
Yeah, that makes sense. And last one from Game Crushers: how can athletes or coaches track progress in isometric training without the access to devices like force plates or other?
Mm.
It's a good one, as it can
Okay.
be quite monotonous. That isometrics kind of, there's not a lot of change to it. There's no fancy weights where you can progress, where the athletes can get motivated by weight progression. So it's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, you do need specialized device like strain gauge and force plate to really measure the force. Um, Unless, of course, if you're using free weights and then you're doing whole isometric, then it's a lot easier. Like you do today, you're doing 100 kilogram of iso squat hold, and then at 5 seconds it's already RPE of 10. But 4 weeks down the road, 5 seconds is only RPE 7. That's improvement. another way to go about is stack the weights. So for example, you start with again isometric squat. You're doing push isometric, and you stack the weights to. You start off with stacking the weights to 105% of 1 RM. The athlete can't push for the first, can't get the weight to move for the first 3 to 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks later you see that 105 they're already starting to move the weight. Then again, you need to, if you need to stack to 110, 120%, that's improvement. Yeah.
Thanks for those questions, and no doubt you'll be happy with those answers. Appreciate your time, Danny. It's been a great chat. I've got a couple of pages of insightful notes to improve my isometric application with the athletes I work with, mate. So I appreciate you jumping on and sharing us with your research, but also practical advice around isometric training and how you can integrate it into a strength and conditioning program for performance. For those that want to follow up and have any either questions or queries, or just follow your work, and I know you've got an ebook as well that provides a bit more information on this topic. Where's the best place to connect, and where can people buy the ebook, mate?
So you can connect with me on Instagram, Danny Lum 82. My ebook is available on my not a very undeveloped website, letter D, performanceconcept.com. Yeah.
We'll add both the links to the show notes, guys. So if you're driving the car, listening to the podcast, don't sweat. You can easily access it when you park the car. Thanks again, Danny. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that's tuned in. If you tuned in late on this episode on YouTube or wherever you might be listening to the live, make sure to listen to the whole episode. Danny dives straight into some good gems there from the start. So you can find this on our YouTube channel until we release it on our podcast in the coming weeks. Our next live chat will be with John Clark, head of performance. That would be 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 19th of March. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Cheers, Danny.
Thanks, Jack. See you.
Smoked it. Thanks, mate. How'd you find that?